Hello everyone, this is Prem Kumar. In this video, we are going to implement OAuth 2.0 authorization in Pega. On a technical point of view, I am going to create a new authentication profile of type OAuth 2.0 and then I will also create a quick connector that can use the OAuth 2.0 authentication profile. So let's start with some basic introduction. First, what is OAuth 2.0? OAuth stands for Open Authorization. It is an industry standard authorization framework. When I refer standard, it means they follow some standard endpoints or they follow some kind of standard scopes and other configuration. I can give you a very simple example of OAuth 2.0. You can think of how the valet parking works. Let's say you own a car. So you own that resource, the car resource, right? Now, if you want to use the valet parking, what you will do is you will grant the authorization to the person who does the valet parking, right? By this way, you are still the owner of the car, but you do provide some authorization to the guy who can park your car. Now I will explain you a little bit more technical. What you see in the screen is the Quora login page. They provide you an option to continue with either Google or Facebook, right? That's what you see in the screen. Now if I try to continue with Facebook, what I get here is Quora is requesting access to the name, profile picture and email address. It means it is requesting some authorization. If you look at this URL, you will see OAuth is used. And you also see different query strings like the client ID, the redirect URI. Let's copy everything. So now let's explore the query string. You see client ID is there. Then a redirect URI is there. And it is redirecting to Quora.com. And response type is there. If you look at the response type, it is of type code. Scope is there. Scope is of email. And then state is there. So what are these query strings? Let's explore each one of them in detail. Let me first start with the client ID. As you see in the sign up screen, Quora has integrated with Facebook so that they provide them an option to sign up using Facebook. It means Quora can get authorized by using Facebook. So Quora is a client to Facebook. So their developer must have already created some kind of integration between Quora and Facebook. That is why you see the client ID. If you try logging in your browser, you will also find the same client ID. Redirect URI is, of course, they want to redirect back to Quora. And response type code. This is decided based on the OAuth 2 grant type. You have different grant types to use in OAuth 2.0 and authorization code is one of the grant type. When you use authorization code, then you get response type as code. And then scope, since you want to use some email address and all other user details are automatically coming in, so you can use the scope as email. And state, it's more like a relay state that helps with the request response mapping. It means there is no attack in between the URL. So here what you understand is Quora is application, Facebook is an application, and I am the user who have a valid credentials in Facebook. So I want to provide or grant access to Quora to use Facebook as authorization. If I click continue as Prem, then I provide or I grant the access to Quora and then an access token will be exchanged and finally it can use the Facebook resource. So now you know OAuth 2.0, it uses token based authentication. Whatever grant types you use, at the end you need the access token to access the resource. So token is always needed and there is no password sharing. It means I never shared my Facebook password with the Quora for authentication, right? But there are some grant types which uses the password sharing. Okay, now let's look at the different grant types that OAuth 2.0 uses. There are around 5 grant types. The first two are the most commonly used, authorization code and client credentials. Then we also have implicit grant type, then resource owner password credentials. And finally, we also have JWT bearer. First, I will start with explaining the flow about the authorization code. What you see in the screen is Quora as the client application and it want to use the resource from Facebook. Here, when I use the authorization code grant type and I am into Quora, I want to use my details. So what Quora will do is it will prompt me a screen to grant the access. This is exactly what we saw before. So first step, authorization request will come to the resource owner who is me. And then I will provide them the access. I grant them the authorization and with that they get a code. And that authorization code as a third step, it goes to the authorization server. So authorization server is where it validates the code and then it sends the access token. As a fifth step, with the access token, we can make a call to the API or we can access the resource with the access token. So this grant type is normally used when a user wants to use the OAuth 2.0 authorization. Here I am the user, so authorization code can be the right appropriate grant type for this requirement. Now let's say there is two backend application it wanted to use the OAuth 2.0. So there is no front-end user to grant them the access. Then can we use this authorization code? No, we cannot use this authorization code, but instead we can use the client credentials grant type. So the main difference between the client credentials and authorization code grant type is there is no user involved, only the applications talk to each other. So there is no authorization code involved. As you see in the screen, the first two steps are not there in the client credentials grant type. Instead, the client application, they will have the client ID and client secret, which will be used to get the access token. The first step will be, it will send an authorization request with the client credentials. Once the authorization server receives those details, then it can validate and provide the access token. With the access token, the application will try to access the resource and then the protected resource will be provided to the application. So use client credentials grant types when two applications or two backend applications, they want to use OAuth 2.0 protocol. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use the client credential grant type, but we will also look into other grant types which OAuth 2.0 supports. The third one is resource owner password credentials. If you remember in the first two grant types, the password of Facebook was never shared with Quora, right? But with this grant type, the password of Facebook will be shared with the Quora application. So only use this grant type when a big trust is established between these two applications. When you have these two applications in your own cluster and when you have high trust, then you can do this. Otherwise, it poses a high security risk. The next option is JW2 bearer. As you see in the previous video, we talked about OpenID Connect where we get the JW2 token. We can also use the same JW2 token for the OAuth 2.0 authorization. So with the signed JW2 token, we can also get the access token from the authorization server. And the final grant type is implicit grant type. It is mostly used with the JavaScript applications and Pega do not support this implicit grant type. Okay, now in this tutorial, what I'm going to show you is I'm going to use Pega as the client application and the authorization server or the resource owner, it is going to be Facebook. So I'm going to access my Facebook details. And also I'm going to use client credentials grant type. So it's going to be a two-legged flow. On the first leg, I will send the client credentials and then I will try to get the access token. And in the second leg, with the access token, I will try to access the resource. Let's get started. Okay, now I am into Facebook developer console. From here, I want to integrate to Pega, right? So I have to create a new app integration. Whatever OAuth 2.0 provider you use, most of the time you should start with the app integration. Let's straight away create a new app. Click on create app, select the consumer and then give the display name. I'm going to say clients app and then create app. So here we have added a new application. Then go to settings and basic. There you will find your app ID and app secret. This is going to be the client ID and client secret when we want to use the client credentials grant type. As I told during the workflow, there are two legs. In the first leg, we will try to get the access token and in the second leg, we will try to access the resource using the access token. First, we want to know how to access the token, right? If you look at this Facebook developer page, there you will find details about the different access tokens. Facebook, they do provide a lot of access token. The main access token can be user access token or app access token. User access token can be used when you use the authorization code grant type, when the user clicks or grants the authorization. And app access token, it can be used with the client credentials grant type when you have backend applications need to use the OAuth 2.0 protocol. So in our scenario, we have to use this app access token. So click on it. That will give you the block on which you can find the details about the app access token. Here you need to use the app ID and app secret. Scroll little down. There you will find the curl example. So this is the URL which we are going to use. The URL is going to be OAuth access token with the three query strings, client ID, client secret and grant type. Now let's test this using Postman to get the access token. Here you copy paste the URL and all the three query strings. The grant type query string is going to be client credentials grant type, and for client ID and client secret, just copy the app ID and app secret. Now that I copied everything, let's click send to get the access token. We did successfully receive the access token. Now the first leg is completed. In the second leg, we need to access some resource or some API using this access token. Under this Graph API page, you can find a lot of details about different APIs which you can use. Always do remember, if you want to use some Facebook data, you need to have the right scope. And by default, now Facebook has a lot of security features. So you cannot just use all the scope without some permissions. Only the two scopes which you can get without permission is on email and then user profile. So I'm going to use a very simple API. Here I'm going to use this API for an user ID to get the ID, name, email, picture by providing the access token. So here I'm going to use my own ID. So my Facebook ID I just copied. Now I will try to replicate it into the Postman. Now in the Postman, open up a new tab and then give the right URL. I'm just copying the entire URL, and in the Postman if you paste, then the query string will be rightly parsed. You see in the field ID, name, email and picture, and in the access token, I will copy the response access token which we received from the last call, and then the user ID. Just click send. Now I should be getting all my details. So here you see we did receive all the response details. Okay, now let's see how we can access this same Facebook resource using Pega's OAuth 2.0. Now as a first step, let's create a new authentication profile of type OAuth 2.0. Go to create menu, security, then authentication profile, and then use OAuth 2.0. Create and open. Now OAuth 2.0, you can choose the type of provider. There are different types of provider, and you also see Facebook as a provider already defined. So how do we get this drop down? If you scroll little down under the security, there you will find OAuth 2.0 provider. Click on this. It will list the list of providers that is already shipped within the Pega platform. You can also create new OAuth 2.0 provider. So when do we create this new provider? If you want to reuse this OAuth 2.0 provider at different places, then you can create it as a new instance and then it can be reused across places. Reusing in the sense, you will just get it in the drop down and then you can select. When you select this option, you will get some details gets pre-filled. For example, the access token and other advanced configuration details. All these can be pre-filled into the OAuth 2.0 provider details. If you just open this Facebook, then there you will find all these details. It do support only two grant types as client credentials and authorization code. And then you see all these details are pre-filled. As I already told, OAuth 2.0 is a standard protocol, so definitely they should be using some standard endpoints. As you see, authorized, access token are standard endpoints, and authentication scheme of post. Access token is sent as authentication header, and you also see other details. If you really want to add more security by using certificates, you can very well do it in here, and that will be automatically applied. Now let's provide the client identifier and client secret. Scope is not a mandatory field, but it is always good to give the right scope to get the right authorization. If you go to this URL, there you will find a lot of scopes defined, and you also see an alert that app review will be done if you use scopes apart from email and public profile. So I'm going to just use these two scopes. If you want to define multiple scopes here, just use space. So I'll just say space and then add the other scope. And scroll down, endpoint configuration, it is already pre-filled. You know from where it gets pre-filled? It gets pre-filled from the OAuth 2.0 provider instance. Let's get back here, and everything can stay default. So I'm just going to save this. So we have successfully created a new authentication profile instance, and we also looked into the configuration of OAuth 2.0 provider instance. Now let's create a new connect REST to use the resource by using the OAuth 2.0 authentication. I'm going to use the connect REST wizard. I will explain in detail about the connect REST wizard in a separate video, but for this video, I will just quickly navigate through the wizard. Go to configure, integration, connector, connect REST. So I say system Facebook and then endpoint. Just copy this endpoint. Don't copy this access token because the access token will be automatically passed from the OAuth 2.0 authentication. Just copy only the field as query string and the URL. Copy this and then paste it into this endpoint URL. Pega will automatically parse everything. And in the resource path, I want to parameterize this because currently it is hard coded as my Facebook ID. So I will parameterize this, and the field will be a query string. Now scroll down, and the authentication, we have to add the newly created Facebook OAuth. Just use add authentication and then select use existing and then use Facebook OAuth. And this should pre-fill all those details which are configured into the OAuth 2.0 instance. As you can see, the client ID, client secret scope, everything is there perfectly. Now let's move to the next step. Here you can provide the resource name. I'm going to say get FB profile and it's going to be get method. Now move to the next step. And here you can add a REST response. I'm going to say add a REST response. Here what we are going to do is we are just going to simulate the response. We already configured the authentication and everything. So this should successfully return me a result. And the parameter is here. The field is here. Click on run. Let's check. And we did receive 200. Now let's scroll down and check all these response details are here. Now Pega wizard will take care of mapping and creating the right data model for the request and response. Go to next step and there we can see an integration layer and data layer is getting created. Just click create. You see this is creating all the rules for the REST integration. Now let's go to the data page and open the data page to try to test the OAuth 2.0. Now let's run this data page and check again. So I'll do a run and then provide the right fields and click run. You see, you should be getting the response rightly mapped. The ID, name and the picture, everything got perfectly mapped. Before ending this video, let's also check how the access tokens are stored into the Pega. If you go to App Explorer and if you search for access token under OAuth 2, you can find a class. Click on the class. There you will find an instance, access token instance. Now click on it. So now you know how Pega stores the access token. It stores it into the database. So next time when Pega makes the API call to the same resource, then it first checks if an unexpired access token already exists in the database, then it will use the access token. Also, always do remember Pega makes our job easy. As we already know, client credentials is a two-legged flow, where in the first leg we get the access token and in the second leg we will pass the access token to get the resource. But with the Pega's development, you just configure the OAuth 2.0 authentication profile instance and the engine code will take care of the first leg in getting the access token. So what you will be doing is in the connect REST rule, you just configure the authentication profile of OAuth 2.0 and then Pega will automatically pass it as a bearer token in the authentication header. So please don't try to pass it as a bearer token in the authentication header. Just configure the authentication profile and Pega will take care of the rest. We are at the end of this video. I hope I explained this OAuth 2.0 clearly. I also have a dedicated blog post on OAuth 2.0 basics as well as Pega when it acts as a consumer as well as the provider of OAuth 2.0. I'll provide the link in the description of this video which you can look into. I'll see you in the next video.